Well, hello, everybody. If it's okay with you, I'm going to start. It is 2 o'clock. This isn't highly, we don't have a lot of people in here right now. That's going to change real soon. You know, one of the things that I want to talk about, kick off here with you, is that this is probably one of the more significant problems we have in our industry right now. And I think it's going to be interesting to share with you, have a chance to talk to you about why that is. I'm John McCumber. I'm with ISC Squared. Yes, we are the certification you love to hate. And not only that, we have several others, and we'd be more than happy to talk and share with you about that. And okay, hold it here, more? Okay. This is the first time I've ever presented in a barn, so you'll forgive me. And I appreciate this. And no, we love it here in South Dakota, and in fact, I had to dig through the closet and definitely had a South Dakota shirt to wear today. And it was a great opportunity to come and talk to you about what I think is one of the more important things that we've undertaken here at ISC Squared in the last several months that I've had this position. I have the greatest title of anybody can have in there. I don't know what the job entails yet. I've been at it a year and we're working through the advocacy role, but it didn't say thought leader and it didn't say evangelist. So that was good for me. I did include this one slide only to show that I was not hired for my looks. What are we going to talk about for the next few minutes here while I'm here? We want to talk about what is a lexicon and why we have it. I have no idea why I have these Faraday cages for flowers, but they do have up here if you're interested in coming up. It's great now, and please feel free to come up. You notice that all these people, there's nobody in the front row, and that's because it's very similar. I'm from North Carolina. I go to the only church in North Carolina that does the wave. I sit in the back with all the other sinners and backsliders, and then when they come around to the church with the collection plate, my whole row just does this as it goes by, and then they look at the empty bowl and they send it back down my row, and we all do this again. So that's why we go and do the wave. So that's what you'll see happening here when I pass the collection plate. We're going to talk about a lexicon, why we needed one. I took this role, as I said, about a year ago. Had a great opportunity to come work with a great group of people and provide an opportunity to really help advance our profession and give back to the profession. Boy, I wish I could get that applause to kick things off here as well. What we want to do, though, is talk about what we're doing in this profession, why it's important. And if you thought after 30 years in this profession I'd come back and have to write primers, I wouldn't have believed you. But as it turns out, part of this job that is advocate is I get to work on Capitol Hill. I get to work in Washington, D.C. with our politicians, legislators. I get to work with lawyers, journalists, and others as we talk about this profession, and I realize we are using language incorrectly. And you would think 30 years into this that we would use words correctly. There's a vendor that I was talking for and supporting here, and at a conference that I was at just a month ago, and this vendor rep, he was a VP for a cybersecurity company, and he said that the whole purpose of his product at that organization, and that when you bought their product, that you would be able to eliminate the threat in your organization. I said, really? He goes, yeah, and he used that term repeatedly throughout his presentation. He said, our product eliminates threat. You can deal with threat. We can deal with threat. Well, the problem, of course, is that threat are human and environmental, and there are significant issues associated with that. So if you're saying you're eliminating threat, you're eliminating what? Weather, and you're wiping out swaths of people whose job it is to attack or to look to exploit information systems. So obviously he wasn't trying to say that they would eliminate threat. What he meant to say, they would help mitigate what? Vulnerabilities. And so one of the things that we did by building the lexicons, and they're available at our booth here. We have one that's the cybersecurity lexicon. We have one that's the basic. We have one that's also available for industrial control systems, and available next month will be the ones for Internet of Things. And this is why they're important and why it's important to use the appropriate language when we talk about these elements in what we call cybersecurity. And being able to communicate effectively is what this is all about. I'm going to be the only person in Deadwood, South Dakota this week to quote Shakespeare. I'm pretty comfortable with that. And we'll see that, information security, what we're talking about here, with the goal of red teams, penetration testers, and all of us in this field, whether we're blue, whether we're red, we have an important obligation to ensure that the men and women we talk to, and you saw the report writing, how important that is, right? We talked about people who do pen testing in that keynote speech by Ed Scotus, and talked about the importance of writing and being able to communicate. It all begins with using the right words effectively and using the words that means something. Somebody else I want to quote here, that again, I'll probably be the only one to quote William Thompson. But William Thompson was probably more known to you as a guy by the name of Lord Kelvin. When he was elevated to the peerage by Queen Victoria, she had already run out of English and Irish peerages to hand to people. So since he was an Irishman and didn't have an Irish peerage, they decided to name him, give him a baronetcy to reward him for his scientific endeavors. So they named him after the river that ran in front of the University of Edinburgh, where he was a professor of natural philosophy. And that, of course, was the River Kelvin. And you know him from the Kelvin scale, from the first transatlantic cables, and other inventions that he brought to us. And this is what he thought of what we do. And this was from his lectures, and this was written in about 1897. Well, to give you an idea and understanding that he understood science as a matter of measurement. Now, if we had followed Lord Kelvin and listened to him and paid attention to his scientific achievements, when he laid the first transatlantic cable in the last century, the last decade of the 19th century, he also used something to communicate across that transatlantic cable. And so what did he use? He used binary communications. He used signals that were able to do this in digital format. And if we would have kept running with that, we'd have been far ahead. But we took a 40-year detour because we followed after a man called Alexander Graham Bell. And Alexander Graham Bell, of course, with the telephone, brought us what? He brought us analog. So we went and took an analog detour for 40 years till we came back around and dealt with digital again. But Lord Kelvin had a very specific understanding of science. Now, when we talk about information security, cybersecurity, is it a science or is it an art? We often treat it as an art. And that's what we want to talk about, how we help build this out. Where's the disconnect? We're doing this as an art. It should be a science. Understanding science is understanding the science of measurement and the understanding of language. And language became an important part. How do we capture what it is we do and how do we explain it to other people? I go to every conference, all these conferences I go to, there's somebody going to talk about how to translate cybersecurity to the C-suite. I've seen that lecture 1,000 times, and they have varying degrees of what they try to do, but the issue is if you can give people the ability to measure, to be able to manage, then you have the opportunity to share effectively with them of what you're going to be able to do for them. Traditionally, what we call cybersecurity looks like this. It's technical issues, it's vulnerability-centric. What's vulnerability-centric? And if you don't know what a vulnerability-centric security is, all you have to do is think of the TSA, right? I can't carry my knitting needles on the airplane. Why can't I carry knitting needles on an airplane? I might stab somebody with them. Why do people carry knitting needles on an airplane? So they can knit. But no, we could stab somebody. I'm going to bring a bottle that's over 3 ounces. Well, it could have been used as an explosive. It could have. If we ran cybersecurity the way TSA runs airline security, it'd be a major problem, wouldn't it? Because every vulnerability, we would have to develop and somehow be able to understand what the countermeasures and the application of countermeasures would be. And we can't just have the luxury of confiscating vulnerabilities from everybody in cybersecurity as they go, oh, you're going to buy that? Well, you have to get rid of this application. You have to get rid of these protocols. We don't have the luxury of doing that. And that's what it is. And there's literally, at the end of the day, very little actual analysis. It's based on state. Let's talk about words. And one of the worst words we use in this business is security. That's a horrible word because it doesn't mean, it's like the word love. Are you going to get security? Do you have love? I don't know. I've been married 38 years. My wife's here with me on this trip. But she was like, oh, my God, it's you again. We like having the time apart. And so is that love? I don't know. But it's worked for us for 38 years. So what is security? I've been a security analyst. I've had the privilege of doing that job, a security consultant. And one of the challenges you always have, people go, when you leave here, I want my systems to be secure. Can I give you security? Oh, can't give you security because it's an ideal. So security is often addressed as a state. It's someplace we get to. And 30 years ago, a lot of the research at the National Security, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and other government agencies were focused on achieving a state of security. And then they realized, well, it's not a full state. So we'll do C2, B1, B2A1, if those of you as old as I am and can remember back that far. So security as a word is a terrible word. It doesn't help any of us to use the term. So what it is that we do is important in understanding what it is that our profession provides organization is that what we do is not provide security, we provide risk management. What's risk management? This is risk management. I'm going to make these are going to be available on the website for you, so don't worry if you don't have this. I'm happy to share with you. These are about risk. We help people manage and understand their risk. And why do we have to do a lexicon? Because all these elements of risk actually have a mathematical relationship that supports Lord Kelvin's thesis. It allows us to understand and look at what the risk management process is. We all make risk management decisions in our lives, and we all are used to doing them what? We do those and make risk decisions based on how we feel. And that's a terrible thing. You know, let me talk about one of the great things that I love to do in a graduate course that I teach at George Washington University. I tell the students, I said, you know, a lot of you, and this is a dated example now, a lot of people don't remember John Madden. He was a great, I loved his football announcer as a coach. He's a very interesting guy. And what's unique about John Madden, if you remember, he didn't want to travel by commercial aircraft. He saw an aircraft accident, witnessed as a young man, and he decided he was never going to die in an aircraft accident. So what did John Madden do to get to all the sporting events that he actually called? He drove around in a bus. And he had a driver, and he had a professional driver, and the bus. So you all know this story. I have my students calculate what's the likelihood of his demise in that bus versus commercial aircraft. The number works out to approximately 288 times more likely to die in that bus than than worried to travel by commercial aircraft to all those events. But again, his understanding of risk and understanding of risk management was based on what? How he felt. Not really about the math behind it. But when it comes to information security, we can't tell people how they feel. And I can't advise you on how you feel. So when we do pen testing, one of the things that Ed Scotus made a big thing on the keynote, he talked about, you have to bring business value. Is that a pen tester's job? I don't know if it is. I'm not saying I disagree with him, you know, at face value, but understanding that business value is about understanding the elements of risk, how they relate to the organization, and what they're willing to do. And the best way for you and I to understand that is decide what risk means to you and me and how we develop risk in our lives and how we can be able to understand how we measure that. So one of the things that we can do in life to manage risk, you know, the largest risk business in the United States is insurance. So we have the insurance companies that help transfer risk, right? They'll take on some of your risk. How about the latest ads? We have accident forgiveness. We're not going to hold it against you if you get in a little teeny fender bender. We have a special accident forgiveness insurance. I don't know how many of you read the fine print. If you read the fine print on those ads, it is a special insurance policy. Why is it a special policy? They have already factored in that accident for you, and you pay rates accordingly. You pay rates for a given first accident and then follow on to your second before they can raise the rates. It is factored in actuarially. So they're not fools. These insurance companies know they have to do that. We have to be able to have that ability to have an intelligent conversation with the men and women that we support in information security, and we as cybersecurity professionals have to be able to do. Let's talk about some of these. This is what it looks like notionally. What we have here is we can sit there and asymptotically reduce risk. Anybody know the term asymptotically? Yeah, I know. I said there wasn't going to be math today, and I apologize. But yes, you can asymptotically reduce risk while you exponentially increase costs. And even though you put some emphasis on the systems early on, and that improves their performance, over time, as we add safeguards, as you see there on the x-axis, right? As we apply safeguards, there's something we call latency. Latency adds overhead to our systems. Cryptography, SIMs, running carbon black, all these technologies are great and they work, but they also add latency. And it's important for us to understand the impact on the system. So when people say they want to be secure, they don't say they want to be secure. They say they want to be somewhere in the blue box. That's what this is about. So our job is to paint the box for them. There's a lot of cubic visualization in cybersecurity we're going to cover today, and hopefully it'll help you make better reports and better managers and people and communicate what this risk management is professionally. So we talk about this diagram. All right, and then we talk about what are the essential elements of risk. And here they are. Threats are important. Let's talk, we're going to break each one of these down and talk about why they're important. So we have threats, vulnerabilities, and assets. And if you take about, there's a mathematical equation. So when people use the term threat, vulnerability, and asset or risk, you have to understand that they're mathematically related. And if you use them incorrectly, it's going to cause miscommunication. I could tell you it does that in Washington. When I try to help with the legislation as we write words, if they take words that are hyperbole out of the media, words that they start using words like hacker. You know, well, what is a hacker? Is it a good person? Is it a bad person? You know, I see a lot of people wearing T-shirts saying, I'm a hacker. So obviously it's a bunch of good people, right? Then why does the media always refer to bad people as hackers? The problem is the word doesn't have a lot of valuable meaning for us. So we have to understand specifically what these elements of risk are and how they're related. So everything I know about cybersecurity in one slide. Now, those look like times, and they're not times, they're just a multiplier function. But in order to have baseline risk, that's your R sub B, you have to have a threat that exploits a vulnerability which in turn impacts a mission or an asset. That's it. That's your baseline risk. Now when we propose safeguards and ways to do it, we move everything to the numerator, and in the denominator put the S for safeguards. Safeguards come in 3 flavors: technology, policy, and human factors. Sometimes easy to remember is the 3 Ps: products, processes, and people. So this allows us to then come up with a formulation for residual risk. The reason I'm explaining this and the reason we're going through this math example is to show you how critical the words are and what the mathematical relationship is between these elements of risk. That's why it's important to use the right terms. When you see a media article, and I've given out dozens and dozens of the lexicons, they're a little pocket guide, they're very simple. They're not meant to be like the NIST guide, which is meant to be comprehensive, and 222 pages. Ours is simply meant to be the key terms, understand these major concepts, and be able to apply them in writing an article or, for God's sakes, writing legislation. If you get to work in Washington, I worked at the Pentagon, everything that bills, you know, you see the name of the bills that come up in Washington, they usually mean the exact opposite of what the bill is meant to do, right? So the bill says, the Peace and Love Act to ensure your taxes are being used for only things you want bill. And as you find out, that's not it at all, right? You know, or the increasing freedom for the use of decreasing the amount of crap you could take on an airplane bill, you know? And so they have all these different ways that they try to shade it. Well, Congress had one recently called the Active Cyber Defense Comprehensive Bill, the ACDC bill. And it was in there, and they used the term hacker throughout it. They didn't know why they were using the term or how to use it. And of course, you know, so some of you are almost as old as I am. You'll remember, you know, when I worked at the Pentagon, the name of the bill and the acronym is as important as what words are in it. So calling it ACDC was brilliant because I said, look, if you pass this, you're going to be on the highway to hell. And it's just really that bad that we're not having the ability to take an intelligent look at what the words mean and how they apply. This is how they apply. This is how they relate mathematically. What this means is that by applying the math behind risk, which is probabilistic multi-attribute utility theory, I only say that once every presentation. But what it is mathematically is risk comes out to the volume of a cube. Again, I told you there's a lot of cubics, a lot of good threes, there's a lot of good numerology and vibes that we have in information security. This is another one. When people talk about, I want to be secured, that's the wrong question. You can't answer that. So when you're out there consulting and people, and I've been asked this dozens of times, if we pay you money to your company, your consultancy, when you leave and give me a report, will I be secure? And the answer is no. I can't do that, but I can tell you how big the box is you're going to carry. And I can help you get a smaller box if you're not comfortable carrying the box the size it is now. And that's the question. I'm from Illinois, so mandatory reading for me was the poet E.E. Cummings. And you know, hey, he didn't like the capital letters, didn't like punctuation. One of the more brilliant things that E.E. Cummings once said was, to him the more beautiful answer who learns to ask the more beautiful question. And in this case, we're trying to learn and help you learn to ask the more beautiful question. So understanding what that is, this is what the lexicons are designed to do to help you create and understand this. If I do a process for an organization, this is what it looks like. It's not red team, blue team. Those are good concepts for us to use. But there's a much broader process called the risk assessment process. It starts by understanding the value of your assets. Then we talk about understanding the threats, and we're going to talk more in detail about threat. Then understanding which vulnerabilities apply to us. Then we talk about risk mitigation strategies and applying safeguards, and then doing that support, making those analyses, and starting back over the process again. That's what this business we're in does. So when people say, well, it's attack and defend, or just do this, it's important to understand that there's a lot more to this than that. It's a bigger set of problems, and it all starts with using the right language. For example, let's start about assets. You know, when you want to be a consultant in cybersecurity, you can do all this red teaming work, and you come and poke around and find vulnerabilities, write reports. You know, the cheapest and most effective way to help your clients is to find out if they can get rid of assets. You know, how about the Office of OMB? You know, all that information. I've got have years of clearances. My wife does as well. So with all those years I have in my information, my information was exposed to those attacks and exploitations of OMB. So OMB had all this dated information that was on spinning disk facing the internet. What you can do for organizations, the best way you can deal with risk is start by understanding your assets and managing your assets. It happened to me later in life. I'm an older person, and you know what? I tell you what, my wife and I hit something we call the family trifecta about 10 years ago, and that's when both kids moved out and the dog died within 6 months. And you get freed up, your life changes, you have this great things that open up to you. The other thing I realized is that I used to have a nice car, and I used to drive it into the parking lot and then worry about where I park it at the mall. And then I would worry about, I had to wax it a couple times a year, and I had to go take it to the thing. I realized I don't own this car owns me. And it's great. And I have to carry expensive insurance. The greatest thing happened to me in my life when I realized I, too, can drive a piece of crap car. And you know what? Once I started driving a lousy car, my world opened up. Things got so much better. My insurance went down. I would park right next to people in the mall parking lot and not care. I would throw empty cups in the back. And you know what's the best thing is valet parking. And you don't know this, but if you have a lousy car, if you ever go to a nice restaurant or a fancy shopping center, if you roll up in your Audi, you roll up in that Mercedes-Benz, they will park your car in front of the restaurant, the venue thing, so other people see that wealthy people go there. If you pull up in my car, your car gets whisked away to the garage faster than anybody's vehicle. They get that POS away from our restaurant. And so these things in life will make your life better. And it's all about reducing and managing your risk. So over the years, I've gotten rid of the boat. I've gotten rid of the nice car. I've gotten this. And I don't carry the risk for those. I don't have to repair every winter. I have to work on the boat and have to pay people to come in and work on the engine. I don't have to do this. You know what the best thing to do now? You like boats? That's great. Get a friend with a boat. It's all about reducing and managing risk. This is the same thing we do for our clients. The best and most important thing we can do is help people get rid and help reduce the amount of exposure they have. Isn't that interesting? So all the little, focus things that we do, this is one of the more valuable things that we can do when it comes to assets. We can define assets based on where we get the information, the value we assign to it. The market value of the information, like Equifax. That's what they do. They take information, chop it up in little bits, and sell it to you in little bits. So it's got an operational market value associated with it. It's like, when you want a great way to make money in real estate is to buy a land and turn it into a cemetery. You buy by the acre, you sell by the foot. So this is the same thing we do with information. We buy it in big chunks, we sell it in little chunks. And that's what dark web and others are doing in trying to make value out of information. Who decides what that value is? And here's how we go about doing that. We determine the owners of the data. And one of the things, and let me tell you something, people, when you get into cybersecurity, I've watched people get so frustrated and leave this career field. And why do they do it? It's because they think their job is to be an enforcer. Their job is to be, I know a fellow, and somebody came up to me after a presentation, goes, I know this guy too, his license plate is Cyber Cop. And he thinks his job is to be the enforcer. And if you think your job's going to be the enforcer, anything where you got, or everybody's going to listen to everything you say, you're fooling yourself, and you're going to have a lousy and unfulfilling career. One of the things I learned about, and I can help you with right now when we talk about asset values and designing that, and understanding how we convey risk. One of the things I learned this from, the best thing you can do for yourself right now in your career is create something called the Pearl Harbor File. And I learned this from a great physical security person in charge of physical security for Tufts University Medical Center in Boston. And I do that because my wife was there. She was going through her pre-med studies. And one of the things that I learned from sitting down with him, I actually met this gentleman because I was concerned about my wife's safety. There's a parking garage. And I wanted to make sure that she could get to it because, you know, if those of you familiar with Boston and Tufts University Medical Center, it's right on the border of a dodgy neighborhood that used to be called the combat zone back in the day. So we had this dodgy neighborhood, and I was concerned about my wife because she worked all kinds of hours as a pre-med student to be able to get to her vehicle, to come home, and everything else in the dark at different hours. One of the things he had taken up and presented to the board of directors at Tufts University Medical Center says, I think we need to put in a secure garage, put additional fencing around that, make it a controlled access to the garage with those blue phones that you see everywhere. And I think we need to install that for the safety of our residents, patients, and administrators. And I go, well, that's a great idea. How much is it going to cost, Fred? He goes, well, that's $689,480.12. So the board looks around the table. They looked at the CFO. Hey, we got Fred's money for him? And the CFO's over there going, no, 680. No, we don't have it. So what now? If you're a security person like Fred, you could tear your hair and say you need to do this and this is critical. Fred is smart. Fred just took the piece of paper, slid it across the table, said, I understand we don't have the money now for this investment. Please sign here. And they signed there. And this is a sad story because one of the things we all know in security is all policy is written in blood. 7 months later, a female employee, the hospital was attacked, sexually assaulted in the parking garage and sued that hospital for $7.2 million successfully. Guess what the board said? Would you ask Fred to come back here with that proposal for safety? And Fred came back in and he goes, look, we found $689,000 for your bridge and for controlled access. And that's a sad story. But this is understandably, this is the role of security. So when I had to do this job for people at the Pentagon and had to provide input for the first Persian Gulf War along these same issues, people like Colin Powell, people like, generals that had to do operational responsibility in the Gulf, one of the things that we had to be able to do is say, here's what you think you need to be able to do. But they made operational decisions. At one point, I was told to take a certain wire and plug it into a certain box so that the general would be able to know where his assets are in the field. I said, sir, if I do that, I violate these 3 DOD policies. He said, I don't care. Right now, it's more important I know where these assets are, even if everybody else in the Iraqi army knows, including Saddam Hussein. So I said, what did I say? Did I say you shouldn't do it? Did I stand up and demand that he understand DOD policy? I plugged that thing into that box and said, fine, sign here. So this is the important lesson here for all of us in cybersecurity, the important goals we do, the things we do. If you expect to be treated with respect and love and everything that comes out of your mouth to be implemented, just quit now. I'm just telling you right now. So how do you handle it? You have to be able to understand operational requirements and do this. This is one of my favorite elements I want to share with you right now, though, because I want to talk about threat. Because there's threat feeds, there's threat analysis, there's people that provide you threat intel. You can provide threat intel to your organization. You know, a lot of these people, I saw the Carbon Black guy talking about all the threat feeds they have. The channel is most organizations I've been to don't have a way to ingest or manage this information into their environment. When you talk about threat, and if you're using the H word and talking about people that are outside the organization, you're talking about helping them deal with hackers, you're only dealing with this big of the problem. This is how big the problem is. Underneath that chart for environmental is a lot of stuff. And I didn't blow it out, but you can understand there's hurricanes, fires, floods, all this stuff, natural disasters. Under the man-made side of threat, and again, I only exploded one area. These all blow out. But I wanted to keep it on something you could read. And you have internal and external threats, hostile, non-hostile threats, and structured or experienced and skilled threats or unskilled threats. We had a problem in the Navy. One system kept having serious problems, and we found out it was a shipboard system, and we found out the biggest problem associated with that were people would bring in coffee or sodas on their shift, and it gets spilled into a server. So is that a hacker? I don't know. But it was an internal, non-hostile, unstructured threat. So being able to sit there and understand the full scope of threat. When these people say threat, is a lot of times you're seeing it's very focused. It sounds like they're saying, well, threat, worldwide, big threats. They're talking about man-made, external, hostile, structured threats, one of 8 major categories. Organizations that have to play defense have to know what? All 8, and have to account for all 8 and manage them. So part of the lexicon was to also give a comprehensive understanding of the word threat and why that's important. Then, of course, the one that we live for is vulnerability determination. Information has 3 primary states. At any given time, it's in transmission, storage, and processing. They're non-overlapping states, and there's no more. Now, what we find is that almost all vulnerabilities scientifically map to transitions in state. So every time people talk about specific, RCP vulnerabilities, whatever they are, they're talking about the WebEx EC vulnerability. All these they're talking about, these are state changes taking place within information as it transfers from transmission, storage, and processing back to another state. So what this allows us to do is understanding these state transitions and looking for where these vulnerabilities exist. If you look at a lot of the products that you're going to hear about, let me walk back real quick here. I want to go back, let's see. I'm going to end the show, and I want to go back to something real quick. I want to go back to a slide that I put up earlier, and I want to show this equation one more time. What I want to do is share with you is that if you look at products, most of them that you're going to talk to, see where the vulnerability over safeguard, and that's what we talk about so often. We talk about, well, you got a vulnerability, you got to have a safeguard. And the answer is you may not need a safeguard. You may be able to, because anytime risk is identified, you have 3 choices. You can accept, mitigate, or transfer. Now, when you say mitigate, you also have to understand that involves cost. And you know what the most hilarious thing about this industry we're in is that the cost of products is table stakes in our industry. I worked for Symantec for 9 years after I got out of the military, and then another 3 at an organization you may have heard of called RSA. And one of the things the salespeople would walk in and do is sell these great products that did great things, but organizations almost universally never planned for what? They had to understand what are the policy changes, who's going to implement it, who's going to management, what are the feeds associated with it, and how is my organization going to be able to react and manage to that. That was what costs money. When I bought a Harley Davidson, Mike, I said, I had the greatest thing, kids left home, dog died, I'm free again, get a Harley, wife gets a Harley, and they said the cheapest thing you get in a motorcycle is buying a Harley. It's the cheapest thing you buy. What you end up paying for, I got to buy all the leather stuff, so I dress like a pirate on the weekends. I got to buy all the black T-shirts. I have to get a tattoo. All that stuff that comes. It's not the bike that's expensive. It's the lifestyle. And it's the same with cybersecurity. It's not the product. It's not carbon black. It's not your SIM. It is the lifestyle that you have to breathe around it, the people and the human factors. So when organizations talk about vulnerability safeguard trade-offs, and they're not talking about assets and threats as associated with it, you're not having a robust conversation about the problem. So again, I just appreciate you letting me run with that. I needed to back up to that because I wanted to share that with you, and something I see all the time, and I've seen it here. I want to say it's important. So we talk about when we talk about risk, and again, I apologize, there is math here today. We talk about putting all those elements together of threat, vulnerability, and asset to understand what an organization's baseline risk is. If you can help an organization measure this, when they talk about business value, you're a pen tester. Here's what I say, I've known Ed Scotus for 25 years, but here's what I don't understand about that. What is your knowledge of business knowledge of your clients? And if you're a pen tester, the answer is probably extremely limited. They're not going to let you sit at the board meeting for 6 months prior to you doing the pen test. So how do I take what I do in a pen test or other vulnerability research activity and do that? And you can say, well, I'm hacking for you. And they can say, well, that's great. But what does it mean when you say you're hacking? Are you a good guy, are you a bad guy? Are you malicious, non-malicious? Are you accounting for non-malicious and unskilled attacks? And if you don't know the answers to those questions, you're not doing a service in vulnerability management. So understanding all those elements associated with vulnerabilities, understanding the 8 primary categories of man-made threat, and then also addressing the elements of threat that are environmental, because just by sheer number of incidents, environmental still far outstrips what you see in man-made attacks. Then you get to go to safeguards. This is another good one. There's another 3 things that you need to know about safeguards. Safeguards can go on, they're technology. I said before, policy and human factors, people. There is a hierarchical relationship among them. What does John mean by that? I can buy a technical solution. I can buy carbon black. And I like using them as a foil because they're a really good product. And I know a lot of the people over there. So I can buy carbon black, but that's not the answer to my problem. The problem is buying carbon black and having it deal with the right policies. You saw that of the lunch guy. What are the policies? What do I need to make sure that it's looking for? Why do I want to look for it? How does it affect the overall business nature of what I'm doing? And if I find vulnerabilities, do I need to mitigate those? And if I do, how much does it cost? How much do I need to do for people? What's the impact on the men and women in the organization? All those have to be considered. They're hierarchically related. So if I buy carbon black, I have to develop the policies and I have to understand, who's going to manage it, run it. Do I have those people staffed? How is it going to impact the employees of the organization? All that has to be considered. If I don't use a technology, if I don't buy a carbon black and try to deal with the threats and to mitigate vulnerabilities with safeguards, and I'm not dealing with that at that level with a technology, I want to do a policy, I still have human factors, and the only safeguard that stands alone is human factors. And why is that? And I got a great example for that. I travel a lot for my job. My wife does as well. We're away from home. And one of the things I did, I remodeled my house, and I did not buy any smart home stuff. None. Now, you've heard the term smart homes, smart cities, and all that. It's an actual acronym you didn't realize. SMART stands for Surveillance Marketed as Revolutionary Technology. But, that being said, you could choose to have these things in your home. And thank you. Yes, I do think that's very strong. Think strongly about it. The other thing I did is I got a sign to put in my front yard that said, protected by, bless you, blah, blah, security. And I put that in my front yard. My neighbor works for IBM, and he knew that I had redone my house, and he came in and he goes, I know you're not paying their $30 a month fee. You've seen the ads, right? Oh, help, there's a guy breaking in my house. And then some disembodied voice goes, please identify yourself. That's really going to help you, right? But it's an opportunity. He goes, you're not paying for that. Why do you have the sign in your front yard? I said, simple. When they come to case the neighborhood, I just want them to rob your house. And that was amazing. It's a human factors type of approach to the problem. So he goes, well, that's great. I never thought of that. He walked away, and a week later, he had a sign in his front yard. He's not paying the $30 a month. So it's just looking at trying to impact and influence the threat. And that's going to be a critical part of what we do is how we manage this. When I was at the Pentagon many, many years ago, I was involved as an expert witness in a very important case. And a case that has driven a lot of the IT industry in the decades since. And I'll tell you what that case was. We had an individual who was a contractor enter some spaces where he was not authorized in the Pentagon, get unauthorized access to a database system we had at the Pentagon, downloaded sensitive information and endeavored to sell it on the open market. He went back to the West Coast and tried to sell it. Our agents, recognized what had happened, found the gentleman, picked him up, and brought him to court in Washington, D.C. The court heard all the cases. I was one of the expert witnesses, and at the end of the case, the judge threw everything out of court and dismissed the case against the person that stole the data and tried to sell it. And so, of course, we always go, what happened? He goes, well, there was one sticky problem that we couldn't deal with and we couldn't get beyond, is when he went and got into that database and put in that diskette and started to download, when he had purloined this password, but system said, welcome to the government blah blah database. So to this day, the reason when you see welcome screens and they have legalese on them, I'm responsible for that. And of course, the reason that became an issue too is that several months later, now I lived in Maryland for a while outside D.C. I didn't live in the luxury Columbia side. I couldn't afford that. My wife and I lived in a town called Elkridge. And I don't know what you know about Maryland, but if you live in Elkridge, people go, what biker bar do you live above? And so we lived in a dodgy area. We lived in Maryland. Somebody came in and robbed our house. Well, we had the daughters at basketball tryouts. And of course, I had a great security. I had dogs, right? So when I came home, the door was ajar. All my stuff was gone, and my dogs were there going, some people came here and fed us while you were gone. And so that didn't always work as a safeguard. But we dealt with those. The dogs were there. So what happened? When I talked to the judge and we tried to find our materials, I said, well, I'm not really going to be able to press charges. He goes, why not? He says, my mat outside front said, welcome. So obviously, applying what I know about computer systems means that I have to understand that having a welcome mat means I invited burglary. So this was an interesting approach in how things have evolved and how things in security evolve in cybersecurity. And it takes us a while to learn these lessons over and over again. And in fact, if you want now, look on Amazon. My mat in front of my house now says, come back with a warrant. We're not those warm neighbors you come over and borrow sugar from. And that's part of the problem. So if I want to now understand residual risk, what do? I take those safeguards, whether they're human factors, whether they're policy procedures, or whether they're technical, and then I apply them to all across the border. I can influence threat. And that's why this line here on this equation goes across all of them. It doesn't just deal with vulnerabilities. I have to be able to influence threat and understand my asset valuation, and make determinations how to reduce my attack surface. And that's why it goes across all of this. So these little points that I'm bringing out to you, they seem really minor, but they're really, really important. And when people in the media, when legislators, when journalists write about this and they use ridiculous terminology, and even in our industry, when people who are experts talk about eliminating threat, we have people that don't use the language correctly and do that. We have to continue to talk about the larger risk assessment process, which I have for you here. And we can use all, those of you who have an MBA or something like that and had these classes in college will remember things like this that you remember from decision support analysis, weak point analysis, all these. These processes all work in understanding how to address risk. And they're still very effective in how to do that. And we use these tools repeatedly. And again, so when we talk about SOC, people talking the business language, I'm not trying to be negative about, I think it's a wonderful thought and idea, but we don't give people the tools to do it. Let's start by using the right language. And that's what the lexicons. What you're going to see here, we have an industrial control systems. We have the basic one. And then we also have the Internet of Things. It's going to be available in about 30 days. All these give us the basic tool sets to discuss this. Because you know what happens? If we can manage, if we can measure, I can justify, target, control, and predict. Those are all critical skills that I have to bring to cybersecurity. That turns this from what we're seeing in cybersecurity that's more of an art that we do and takes it more of a science. And you're going to see a lot of changes. Here's one of my predictions I'll make here. I've not made this publicly ever. I shared this with some colleagues I work with. You know, there's a lot of talk here about penetration testing. That's a career field that's going to go away in about the next 5 to 7 years. It's not going to be a career field anymore. It's going to be automated. And you know, whether you call it machine learning, whether you call it AI, whatever, you know, if you watch a football game on Sunday, you get bruised now with AI, and you get blockchain, whatever you want to call these technologies are going to evolve very rapidly. And so the understanding, what's not going to change is our ability to address the risk management process in language we can all understand. What did we talk about today? I didn't talk about a lot of very deep things. I didn't give a technical talk, but I did want to talk about the importance of language and how we use it in cybersecurity. We need to use the term accurately and understand that there's a mathematical relationship between the terms that we use. Threats should be categorized, and that's why we shouldn't just use the H word. There's nothing wrong with the H word or calling yourself a H person, but it is if it doesn't really clarify what it is you're talking about, what services you provide, or what attacks that you're trying to develop and guard against, and it's important. And then, of course, the role we all play individually in it is critical in doing that. I'm going to invite you to get more involved. There's just some links that we have here. But again, I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to give you a couple minutes back. I will answer questions that you have, and I will be around for a while after the presentations. Thanks for coming out to South Dakota. This isn't an easy place to get to, but it's one of the greatest venues for cybersecurity conference. Thank you.